Imagine a world where one city ruled over millions, where mighty legions marched across continents, where emperors believed they were gods on earth. This was Rome, the greatest empire the world had ever seen. But what happens when the strongest power begins to crumble from within? Today, we uncover the epic story of glory, betrayal, and collapse, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. The birth of Rome, from myth to kingdom, every great story begins with a legend, and the story of Rome is no different. Long before it became the most powerful empire on earth, Rome started as a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River in central Italy. What makes the beginning of Rome so fascinating is that it mixes both myth and history, creating a tale that feels larger than life. The most famous legend is about twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. According to the myth, they were abandoned as babies and left to die by the river. But instead of perishing, they were saved by a she-wolf, who nursed them until a shepherd discovered them. As they grew older, the brothers dreamed of building a city. However, jealousy and rivalry got in the way. Romulus killed Remus after a heated argument, and then he founded the city of Rome in 753 BC, naming it after himself. While historians debate whether this legend is true, it gave the Roman people a powerful story of strength, survival, and destiny. In reality, Rome most likely began as a cluster of villages made up of farmers and shepherds. These people lived on 7 hills that surrounded the Tiber River. Being near the river was important. It gave them water, fertile land, and a way to trade with nearby communities. The hills also provided protection from invaders. Over time, these villages joined together to form one community, and that community became the foundation of Rome. At first, Rome was ruled by kings. These early kings were not only leaders in politics, but also in religion. They organized the people, set laws, and made Rome stronger. One of the most well-known kings was Tarquinius Priscus, who is credited with building some of the city's first important structures, like the Circus Maximus, where Romans later held chariot races. Another legendary king was Servius Tullius, who divided the people into classes based on wealth, shaping the social and political structure of Rome for years to come. But not all kings were good. The last king of Rome, Tarquinius Superbus, ruled with cruelty and arrogance. His abuses of power angered the people, especially after a tragic event involving the noble woman Lucretia, whose suffering sparked outrage. In 509 BC, the Romans finally rose up, overthrew their king, and vowed never to be ruled by a monarch again. This moment was a turning point. It marked the birth of the Roman Republic, where citizens would elect leaders and create a system of government that gave power to the people, at least in theory. The early story of Rome shows us 2 things. First, Rome's identity was built on both myth and reality. The legend of Romulus and Remus gave the Romans pride and a sense of destiny, while the actual history of overthrowing the kings showed their love for freedom and resistance against tyranny. Second, it highlights how even small beginnings can lead to greatness. From shepherds and farmers on 7 hills, Rome would grow into a republic, then into an empire, and eventually into the most powerful force of the ancient world. In many ways, the birth of Rome was not just the start of a city, but the start of an idea. The idea that discipline, unity, and ambition could turn a small community into something everlasting. This idea would carry Rome forward for centuries, shaping not only Italy, but also the future of Europe and the Western world. The rise of the Roman Republic, when the Romans finally overthrew their last king in 509 BC, they made a promise to themselves. Never again would one man hold all the power. Instead, they created a new system of government, the Roman Republic. This was not a democracy like we think of today, but it was a bold experiment in giving citizens a voice and making sure no single ruler could control everything. At the heart of the Republic was the idea of checks and balances. Rome had 2 leaders called consuls, who were elected every year. These consuls shared power, which meant one could stop the other from becoming too powerful. They commanded the army, managed the government, and represented Rome in foreign affairs. But their time in office was short, only 1 year, so they could not become dictators. Another important part of the Republic was the Senate. At first, the Senate was made up of rich and powerful men from noble families called patricians. The Senate advised the consuls and made important decisions about laws, finances, and foreign policy. Over time, the Senate became the most powerful institution in Rome, guiding the Republic for centuries. But not everyone in Rome had the same rights. Ordinary citizens, called plebeians, wanted more power and protection from unfair laws. At first, plebeians had little influence, and many of them were poor farmers, soldiers, or craftsmen. They often found themselves at the mercy of the patricians, who controlled most of the land and wealth. This inequality led to struggles known as the conflict of the orders. The plebeians fought hard for their rights. One of their biggest victories was the creation of the tribunes of the plebs. These were officials elected by the plebeians themselves, and they had special powers to protect ordinary citizens. A tribune could veto, or block, any law or action that harmed the people. This was a huge step toward fairness. Another major reform was the 12 Tables, Rome's first written code of laws. Before this, laws were mostly unwritten and controlled by the patricians, which often meant unfair treatment. With the 12 Tables, everyone could see the laws and know their rights. Although harsh by today's standards, these laws gave Rome a sense of order and justice. The Republic also grew stronger because of its army. Every Roman citizen was expected to serve in the military. Discipline, training, and loyalty were at the core of the Roman legions. Soldiers were not only defending their city, but also expanding Rome's territory. This military power helped Rome conquer neighboring tribes and cities across Italy, slowly uniting the peninsula under Roman control. Religion also played a key role in the Republic. The Romans believed their gods guided their success or failure. Priests and religious ceremonies were deeply connected to politics. Every decision, from going to war to passing a law, was tied to signs from the gods. Romans believed that as long as they honored the gods, Rome would remain strong. The early Republic was far from perfect. There were still conflicts between the rich and poor, and sometimes ambitious leaders tried to grab power for themselves. But the system of shared power, written laws, and citizen participation gave Rome stability and strength. Unlike kingdoms that rose and fell quickly, the Roman Republic lasted nearly 500 years. What made the Republic truly remarkable was how it inspired loyalty in its people. Romans believed they were part of something greater than themselves. They were not just serving a king, they were serving the Republic, their families, and their gods. This sense of duty and unity allowed Rome to rise from a small city-state to a powerful nation. In the end, the Roman Republic became more than a government, became a model of law, order, and civic duty that influenced the future of Europe and even the modern world. The idea that no one person should have absolute power and that citizens should have a voice in their government came from this period of Roman history. The rise of the Republic showed the world that Rome was not only strong in battle, but also wise in building institutions. But as we'll see in the next section, this system would be tested by wars, ambition, and the constant struggle between rich and poor. Rome's expansion and the Punic Wars, once Rome had secured its place in Italy, it set its eyes on the wider world. The Roman Republic was ambitious, and its leaders believed Rome was destined for greatness. But to achieve that greatness, Rome needed land, resources, and trade routes. This hunger for expansion led to one of the most famous series of wars in history, the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars were fought between Rome and a powerful city called Carthage, located in North Africa in modern-day Tunisia. Carthage was a wealthy trading empire with a strong navy. It controlled parts of Spain, islands in the Mediterranean, and important trade routes. Rome and Carthage were like two giants competing for dominance, and sooner or later, they were bound to clash. The First Punic War began in 264 BC over control of Sicily, the large island south of Italy.
Ow!
Rome at first was not a naval power, but it quickly adapted. The Romans built ships modeled after Carthaginian designs and trained their soldiers to fight at sea. Instead of relying only on traditional naval tactics, they invented a clever weapon called the corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed Roman soldiers to fight sea battles as if they were on land. This innovation gave Rome an advantage, and after more than 20 years of fighting, Carthage surrendered in 241 BC. Rome had won its first overseas territory, Sicily. But the rivalry was far from over. Now, the Second Punic War to 18-201 BC is perhaps the most famous. Thanks to Carthage's brilliant general Hannibal Barca, Hannibal shocked the world by leading his army, along with war elephants, across the Alps into Italy. This daring move seemed impossible, but Hannibal managed it, bringing the fight directly to Rome's doorstep. For years, Hannibal crushed Roman armies in battle, including the devastating Battle of Cannae, where tens of thousands of Romans were killed. Rome, however, refused to give up. The Republic's strength was its resilience and determination. A Roman general named Scipio Africanus took the fight to Carthage's territory in Africa. This forced Hannibal to return home to defend his city. In 202 BC, the two generals faced off at the Battle of Zama. Scipio defeated Hannibal, ending the war and making Rome the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. The Third Punic War, 149–146 BC, was brutal and final. Rome decided that Carthage was still too dangerous to exist. After a long siege, Roman forces destroyed the city completely. The survivors were either killed or sold into slavery, and the land was cursed so nothing would grow. Carthage, once Rome's greatest rival, was wiped off the map. Rome now controlled not just Italy but also Spain, North Africa, and the Western Mediterranean. The Punic Wars changed Rome forever. It transformed it from a regional power into a Mediterranean empire. Victory brought wealth, slaves, and resources, but it also brought new challenges. The Republic had to govern distant lands and deal with massive economic and social changes. Wealthy Romans grew richer, while poor farmers often lost their land. This gap between rich and poor would cause deep problems later. But for the moment, Rome stood as the undisputed superpower of the Western world. Its armies had proven unbeatable. Its leaders had shown resilience. Its people had demonstrated unmatched loyalty to the Republic. The Punic Wars gave Rome confidence that no enemy could stand in its way, a belief that fueled its future conquests. Still beneath the glory, seeds of trouble were being planted. The riches from war created inequality, greed, and corruption. Rome had defeated Carthage, but the battles within its own society were only just beginning. The rise of Julius Caesar after the Punic Wars, Rome stood as the strongest power in the Mediterranean. But with great power came great problems. Wealth from conquered lands flowed into Rome, but instead of helping everyone, it mostly benefited the rich. The poor grew poorer. Farmers lost their land, and angry mobs filled the streets. Politicians fought for power, corruption spread, and violence became a common part of Roman politics. In this storm of chaos, one man rose higher than anyone else: Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was born in 100 BC into a patrician family, meaning he came from nobility. But his family was not among the richest or most powerful. Caesar, however, had big ambitions. From an early age, he showed great intelligence, charm, and boldness. He understood that to rise in Rome, a man needed both political skill and military success. Caesar set out to gain both. In politics, Caesar proved himself as a master speaker. He knew how to win over the people, or as the Romans called them, the populares. Unlike many senators who cared only for the rich, Caesar often spoke in favor of reforms that helped ordinary citizens, like giving land to veterans and poor farmers. This made him popular among the masses, but it also made the conservative elite, known as the Optimates, suspicious of him. Caesar's real rise came through the military. He formed an alliance known as the First Triumvirate with two powerful men: Pompey, a famous general, and Crassus, the richest man in Rome. Together, they controlled Rome's politics. As part of this deal, Caesar was given command of the Roman legions in Gaul, modern-day France and Belgium. Caesar proved himself as a brilliant military leader. For nearly 10 years, he fought and defeated tribes across the region, extending Rome's territory all the way to the English Channel. His victories made him rich and gave him loyal soldiers who admired him deeply. Caesar even invaded Britain, something no Roman general had done before. To the people of Rome, he became a hero. To the Senate, he became a dangerous man with too much power. When Crassus died and relations with Pompey collapsed, Caesar and Pompey became bitter enemies. The Senate, fearing Caesar's growing influence, ordered him to give up his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. But Caesar knew that if he returned without his army, his enemies would destroy him. In 49 BC, Caesar made his boldest move. He led his army across the Rubicon River, the boundary he was forbidden to cross with troops. By doing this, he declared war on Pompey and the Senate. Caesar famously said, "The die is cast," meaning there was no turning back. This sparked a civil war that would change Rome forever. Caesar quickly defeated Pompey's forces. Pompey fled to Egypt, but there he was assassinated. Caesar, now in control, returned to Rome as the most powerful man in the Republic. He was named dictator, first for a year, then for 10 years, and eventually for life. He began making reforms to strengthen Rome, giving land to the poor, reforming the calendar, which gave us the Julian calendar, and expanding the Senate. But Caesar's power frightened many senators. They feared he wanted to become king, something Romans hated ever since they overthrew their last monarch centuries earlier. His growing control, his popularity with the people, and his disregard for traditional limits made him both admired and hated. The rise of Julius Caesar showed Rome's strengths and weaknesses. He was brilliant, ambitious, and determined, but his success also revealed the cracks in the Republic. The system that had once kept Rome balanced could no longer handle men of such power. Rome was changing, and the Republic was on the edge of collapse. In the next section, we'll see how Caesar's rise would lead to betrayal, bloodshed, and the end of the Roman Republic. The assassination of Caesar by 44 BC. Julius Caesar had become the most powerful man in Rome. He had won wars, expanded Rome's territory, and made reforms that changed the Republic forever. But his growing power created fear among many senators. They believed Caesar no longer respected the traditions of the Republic, and that he wanted to crown himself king. To Romans, the word king was filled with hatred. They had sworn never to be ruled by a monarch again, since overthrowing their last king centuries earlier. This fear set the stage for one of the most famous murders in history, the assassination of Julius Caesar. At first, Caesar's popularity with the people was unmatched. He gave land to veterans, provided food for the poor, and even invited more people into the Senate, including those from conquered lands. These changes made many ordinary Romans see him as a hero who cared about them. But for the wealthy patricians, Caesar was dangerous. He was breaking traditions, weakening the Senate's power, and ruling more like a monarch than a leader of a republic. Things became worse when Caesar was given the title dictator for life. This was shocking because dictatorship in Rome was supposed to be temporary, only during emergencies. By taking this lifelong title, Caesar looked like he wanted permanent control. Rumors spread that he planned to wear a crown. Even though Caesar publicly refused a crown offered to him by his ally Mark Antony, many senators did not believe him. A group of senators began plotting against him. They called themselves the Liberators, claiming they wanted to save the Republic. Two of the most important conspirators were Marcus Junius, Brutus, and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Brutus was especially important because he had once been close to Caesar, almost like a son. His involvement gave the plot more weight, as Romans would see that even Caesar's friends believed he was dangerous. The conspirators planned to strike on March 15, 44 BC, a day known in history as the Ides of March. On that day, Caesar was scheduled to attend a Senate meeting in the theater of Pompey. According to legend, a soothsayer, a fortune-teller, warned him, saying, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar ignored the warning, confident that no one would dare harm him. When Caesar entered the Senate chamber, he was surrounded by the conspirators. At first, they pretended to plead with him about political matters. Then, suddenly, one of them grabbed his toga, and the attack began. Knives were drawn, and Caesar was stabbed again and again. Historians say at least 23 times. In the chaos, Caesar saw Brutus among the attackers. According to later stories, Caesar's last words were, "Et tu, Brute," meaning "you too, Brutus." This moment has become one of the most dramatic betrayals in history, symbolizing the pain of being betrayed by a close friend. When the assassination was over, Caesar's body lay lifeless on the Senate floor. The conspirators believed they had saved the Republic and restored freedom, but they were terribly wrong. Instead of peace, Caesar's death unleashed chaos. The Roman people were furious, not grateful. Caesar had been popular, and many saw him as their protector. His assassination looked less like the saving of the Republic and more like a cruel murder by jealous nobles. Caesar's death created a power vacuum. Who would rule Rome now? His loyal allies like Mark Antony tried to step forward. At the same time, Caesar's adopted heir, a young man named Octavian, began to rise. Instead of restoring the Republic, Caesar's assassination plunged Rome into another series of civil wars. The killing of Caesar marked the beginning of the end for the Roman Republic. The system of shared power had failed, and the Republic could not survive the ambitions and rivalries of powerful men. Caesar's life had brought Rome glory, and his death brought it bloodshed. What followed would be even more dramatic: the birth of the Roman Empire itself. The rise of Augustus and the birth of the empire, the assassination of Julius Caesar, was supposed to save the Roman Republic, but instead, it pushed Rome into even deeper chaos. The senators who killed him thought the people would celebrate their actions, but they were wrong. The Roman citizens loved Caesar. To them, he was a hero who had given them land, food, and hope. His death left the city in shock and anger, and soon Rome was divided. After Caesar's death, his supporters quickly stepped forward to claim power. The two most important figures were Mark Antony, one of Caesar's closest allies, and Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir. Octavian was young, only 18 years old, but he was clever, determined, and carried Caesar's name, which gave him strong influence. Mark Antony, on the other hand, was a skilled general and a powerful speaker who already had loyal soldiers behind him. At first, the two were rivals, but they realized they needed to work together to defeat Caesar's assassins. Antony and Octavian, along with another general named Lepidus, formed an alliance known as the Second Triumvirate. Their first goal was revenge. They hunted down Caesar's killers, Brutus and Cassius, who had fled east. In 42 BC, at the Battle of Philippi, the forces of Antony and Octavian crushed the assassins. Brutus and Cassius both committed suicide, and the liberators' cause was destroyed. It seemed like the Republic had no saviors left. With Caesar's enemies gone, the Second Triumvirate divided Rome's territories among themselves. Antony took the wealthy eastern provinces, including Egypt. Octavian controlled the western provinces, including Italy. Lepidus was given control of Africa, but he soon lost influence and faded from power, leaving only Antony and Octavian as rivals. Antony's time in the East became legendary because of his relationship with Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. Cleopatra was intelligent, ambitious, and already famous for her earlier alliance with Julius Caesar. She and Antony became partners in both love and politics, and together they dreamed of building a great empire from Rome and Egypt. But in Rome, Octavian used this relationship to turn public opinion against Antony. He spread propaganda, claiming Antony was abandoning Rome and planning to make Cleopatra his queen over the Roman people. The rivalry exploded into war. In 31 BC, the two sides clashed at the Battle of Actium, a massive naval battle in Greece. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his trusted general Agrippa, defeated Antony and Cleopatra's forces. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, but their dreams were over. Facing certain defeat, both of them committed suicide in 30 BC. With their deaths, Octavian stood alone as the ruler of Rome. In 27 BC, Octavian received the title Augustus, meaning the revered one. This was the birth of the Roman Empire. Officially, Augustus claimed he was not a king. He kept the old titles of the Republic, like consul and senator. But in reality, he had complete control. He commanded the army, controlled the Senate, and had the loyalty of the people. Rome was no longer a republic, was now an empire led by a single ruler. Under Augustus, Rome entered a time of peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana, a Roman peace. For more than 200 years, the empire experienced stability, strong leadership, and expansion. Augustus rebuilt Rome with beautiful buildings, strengthened its defenses, and reformed its government. He made sure that ordinary people had food, jobs, and entertainment, which made him extremely popular. The rise of Augustus marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The Roman Republic, with its system of elected leaders and shared power, was gone. In its place stood the Roman Empire, vast, wealthy, and powerful. but ruled by one man. Rome had traded freedom for stability, and for centuries, it would remain under the rule of emperors. The birth of the empire was both a triumph and a warning. Augustus brought peace and glory. But his power also showed that Rome's old values of shared government and citizen rule were gone. The Republic was dead, and the age of emperors had begun. The glory of the Roman Empire with Augustus as the first emperor, Rome entered what many historians call its golden age. This period was marked by wealth, expansion, and cultural achievements that made Rome the center of the ancient world. For the first time in centuries, the city was not torn apart by civil wars. Instead, it enjoyed stability, and people from many lands saw Rome as the heart of civilization. This was the age of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. The Roman Empire stretched across 3 continents at its height. From the deserts of North Africa to the forests of Northern Europe, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Middle East, Rome's power could be felt everywhere. Roads built by Roman engineers connected these faraway lands. Soldiers marched on them, merchants carried goods, and ideas traveled faster than ever before. Famous saying, "All roads lead to Rome," came from this network, showing how the empire tied everything back to its capital. Rome itself became a city of wonders. Augustus and later emperors invested in grand building projects. Marble temples, theaters, baths, and forums decorated the city. One of the most famous structures was the Colosseum. It's built under Emperor Vespasian and completed by his son Titus. This massive amphitheater could hold tens of thousands of people. Inside, Romans watched gladiator battles, animal hunts, and public spectacles. These events were brutal, but they also kept the people entertained and loyal to the empire. Another symbol of Roman glory was the aqueducts. These were impressive structures that carried fresh water into the city from miles away. With aqueducts, Rome had fountains, baths, and clean drinking water. Public baths became a central part of Roman life, where people not only bathed, but also met friends, discussed politics, and did business. The Romans prided themselves on their advanced engineering, and their achievements still inspire awe today. The Roman Empire was not just about buildings and entertainment, it was also about law and order. Augustus and his successors created a professional army and police force to keep peace within the empire. Roman law became more organized and consistent, giving citizens protection and rights. Many modern legal systems are still influenced by Roman law, especially ideas about fairness and justice. Culturally, Rome thrived. Writers like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid created literature that celebrated Rome's greatness. Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid, told the story of Rome's mythical founding and praised its destiny to rule the world. Latin, the language of Rome, spread across the empire. Even after Rome's fall, Latin would remain important, influencing languages like Italian, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. Trade also flourished. Goods from distant lands flowed into Rome. Spices from India, silk from China, gold from Africa, and grain from Egypt. In return, Rome exported wine, olive oil, glassware, and weapons. The empire became a melting pot of cultures, where people of different languages, religions, and traditions came together under Roman rule. Of course, life in Rome was not perfect. While the rich enjoyed luxury, many poor citizens still lived in crowded apartments and relied on free grain provided by the government. Slavery was also common, and slaves worked in households, farms, and even in dangerous mines. Still, compared to the chaos of the late Republic, most Romans felt that the empire gave them stability and opportunities. The glory of the Roman Empire showed the world what was possible when discipline, engineering, and ambition came together. Rome's monuments, roads, laws, and culture created a legacy that would outlive the empire itself. It was an age of pride and achievement, when Romans believed their empire would last forever. But history has a way of proving even the mightiest wrong. While Rome shined with wealth and power, cracks were already forming beneath the surface. Corruption, greed, and inequality slowly began to weaken the empire. The Golden Age would not last forever. The problems and decline of the empire for centuries, Rome looked unstoppable. Its armies marched across the world, its buildings stood tall, and its wealth poured in from every corner of the empire. But even the strongest walls eventually developed cracks. The Roman Empire, like a giant standing on shaky legs, began to face problems that slowly weakened it from within. These issues grew over time and eventually pushed Rome toward decline. One of the biggest problems was corruption in government. Many emperors and officials cared more about their own wealth and power than the good of the empire. Some emperors became famous not for their leadership, but for their cruelty, greed, or madness. For example, Emperor Nero is remembered for wasting money on personal luxuries, while ignoring the needs of the people. Such rulers weakened trust in the government and left the empire unstable. Another problem was the gap between the rich and the poor. The empire's conquests brought huge amounts of wealth to Rome, but most of it stayed in the hands of the rich elite. Poor citizens often depended on free grain and entertainment, what Roman writers called bread and circuses, to survive. This made many Romans dependent on the government instead of working for themselves. Meanwhile, the rich grew richer, buying massive estates and using slaves instead of hiring free workers. This inequality created tension and made the empire less united. The empire also faced economic troubles. As Rome expanded, it became expensive to maintain such a large army and government. Roads, forts, and cities needed constant money to keep them running. To pay for these costs, emperors raised taxes, which angered the people. Worse, the government sometimes made new coins with less silver and gold in them, which caused inflation. Prices rose, and money lost its value. Ordinary citizens struggled to survive, while the empire's financial system grew weaker. Another serious problem was the size of the empire itself. Rome had grown so large that it was difficult to govern. From Britain to Egypt and from Spain to the Middle East, it took weeks or months for news or orders to travel. Local governors often acted on their own, and rebellions sometimes broke out in distant provinces. Holding the empire together required huge armies, and this constant need drained Rome's resources. At the same time, outside threats grew stronger. Tribes such as the Goths, Vandals, and Huns began pressing against Rome's borders. These groups were skilled fighters, and Rome struggled to hold them back. To defend itself, Rome relied more and more on foreign mercenaries, soldiers from outside the empire who fought for money. But these mercenaries were not always loyal, and sometimes they even turned against Rome. There were also problems of leadership. After the golden age of strong emperors, like Augustus, many emperors came to power through violence, bribery, or military force. Some ruled for only a few months before being assassinated or overthrown. This constant change created instability and left the empire weak. In 285 AD, Emperor Diocletian tried to fix the problem by dividing the empire into two parts: the Western Roman Empire, with Rome as its capital, and the Eastern Roman Empire, with Byzantium, later called Constantinople, as its capital. At first, this helped manage the vast territory, but over time it made the empire less united. The stronger eastern half would survive for many centuries, while the western half continued to weaken. By the 4th and 5th centuries, Rome's problems had piled up: corruption, poverty, weak leadership, invasions, and economic troubles. The empire that once ruled the known world was now struggling to protect itself and its people. The glory of Rome was fading, and the final collapse of the Western Roman Empire was drawing near. The decline of Rome shows us that no empire, no matter how powerful, is immune to weakness. Rome fell not in one day, but over many years, as small cracks grew into deep fractures. The empire that once seemed eternal was heading toward its end. The fall of Rome, for 76 AD, for centuries, Rome had stood as the greatest empire in the world. Its legions marched across continents, its laws shaped society, and its culture influenced millions of people. But by the 5th century AD, the Western Roman Empire was no longer strong, which was fragile, weakened by corruption, invasions, and economic troubles. The cracks that had slowly spread for hundreds of years finally broke apart, leading to one of history's most famous events, the fall of Rome. By this time, the empire was divided into two halves: the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. The East, ruled from Constantinople, was wealthy and strong, but the West, ruled from Rome and later Ravenna, was weak and constantly under attack. The Western Empire no longer had the resources or leadership to defend itself against the many enemies pressing in from all sides. One of the greatest threats came from Germanic tribes, such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths. These groups were originally pushed into Roman lands because of the fierce Huns, led by the fearsome Attila. The Romans tried to fight them off, but their army was not what it used to be. In 410 AD, the Visigoths, led by Alaric, did the unthinkable. They captured and sacked the city of Rome. For the first time in 800 years, Rome itself was defeated by outsiders. This shocking event showed the world that the empire was no longer invincible. But the troubles didn't stop there. The Vandals, another Germanic tribe, invaded North Africa, one of Rome's richest provinces. They later sailed to Italy, and in 455 AD, sacked Rome again. The word vandalism that we use today comes from this event because of the destruction they caused. Meanwhile, other tribes carved pieces out of the empire until very little was left. Inside the empire, things were no better. The government was weak. Emperors came and went quickly, and many rulers were puppets controlled by powerful generals. The once mighty Roman legions were filled with foreign mercenaries who were loyal only to their pay, not to Rome itself. The economy collapsed as trade declined, taxes grew unbearable, and money lost its value. The spirit of Rome, the discipline and unity that once made it strong, had faded. The final blow came in for 76 AD. The last emperor of the Western Roman Empire was a young boy named Romulus Augustulus. He was emperor in name only, with little real power. A Germanic general named Odoacer seized control, removed Romulus from the throne, and declared himself the ruler of Italy. Unlike earlier conquerors, Odoacer did not bother to put a new Roman emperor in power. Instead, he sent the imperial crown and robes to Constantinople, symbolizing the end of the Western Roman Empire. The fall of Rome was not one single moment, but a long process of decline. Still, historians often mark 476 AD as the official end, because it was the year Rome no longer had an emperor in the West. The Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, continued for another 1,000 years. But the Western Empire, the Rome of gladiators, legions, and emperors, was gone. The fall of Rome left Europe in turmoil. Without the order and protection of the empire, many lands fell into chaos. Roads crumbled, cities shrank, and learning declined. This period became known as the Dark Ages. Yet even though Rome had fallen, its legacy lived on. Roman laws, language, architecture, and culture influenced the kingdoms that rose after it. In many ways, Rome never truly died. It simply transformed into something new. The fall of Rome reminds us that even the greatest powers in history are not eternal. Strength, discipline, and unity can build an empire, but corruption, greed, and division can bring it down. Rome's story is both a warning and a lesson that still speaks to the world today. The legacy of Rome, the Western Roman Empire, may have fallen in for 76 AD, but Rome never truly disappeared. Its armies, emperors, and political power were gone, yet the legacy of Rome lived on in countless ways. Rome shaped Europe, influenced the modern world, and left behind lessons, achievements, and culture that still surround us today. In many ways, Rome continues to live in our laws, languages, cities, and ideas. One of the most important legacies of Rome is its law. Roman law was advanced, fair, and organized. Concepts like innocent until proven guilty, contracts, and the rights of citizens came from Roman traditions. Even after the empire collapsed, these ideas spread across Europe and became the foundation of many modern legal systems. Today, when people talk about justice, courts, and fairness, they are echoing Roman principles. Another lasting gift of Rome is its language. The Romans spoke Latin, and while the language itself eventually faded, it gave birth to many of the languages we use today. Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Romanian all come from Latin. These are called the Romance languages. Even English, though not a Romance language, it borrows thousands of words from Latin. Words in science, medicine, and law often have Latin roots. So, every time we speak, we are, in a way, speaking the language of Rome. Rome also left a huge mark through its architecture and engineering. Roman builders were masters of design, and many of their creations still stand today. The Colosseum in Rome, aqueducts in Spain and France, and Roman roads across Europe are reminders of their skill. Spires, domes, and concrete, all perfected by Romans, are still used in buildings around the world. Modern stadiums, government buildings, and even bridges are inspired by Roman designs. When we see massive stone buildings or curved arches, we are seeing Rome's influence. The Roman Empire also changed how people thought about government and citizenship. The Republic gave the idea that power should be shared and that leaders should be chosen by the people. Although the Republic eventually collapsed, the idea survived. Centuries later, when nations like the United States and France created modern democracies, they looked back at Rome for inspiration. Words like Senate and Republic come directly from Roman history. Rome's culture was another part of its lasting impact. Roman literature, art, and philosophy influenced Europe during the Renaissance, a period when scholars rediscovered ancient knowledge. Writers like Virgil and historians like Livy were studied and admired for centuries. Roman stories, myths, and history are still told today, from school classrooms to Hollywood movies. Religion also played a key role in Rome's legacy. In the 4th century AD, the Roman Empire adopted Christianity as its official religion. Even after the fall of the Western Empire, Christianity continued to spread across Europe and the world, shaping cultures, traditions, and beliefs for centuries. The Catholic Church, centered in Rome, carried on many aspects of Roman influence. Finally, Rome left behind a warning. Its rise and fall showed the world that no empire is eternal. Rome's success came from discipline, unity, and ambition, but its decline came from greed, corruption, and division. Historians and leaders often study Rome's history to learn what makes societies strong and what causes them to fail. Today, we still see Rome in our roads, languages, governments, and buildings. The phrase "Rome was on T built in a day" reminds us of the hard work needed to create greatness, while the story of its fall reminds us how fragile power can be. Rome may have fallen as an empire, but as an idea, it still lives on. The legacy of Rome is clear. It built the foundation for much of the modern world. From the laws we follow, to the languages we speak, and the buildings we live in, Rome's influence is everywhere. Even thousands of years later, the story of Rome continues to inspire, warn, and guide us. The story of Rome may have ended centuries ago, but its lessons still guide us today. If you found this journey through Italy's epic history as powerful as we did, don't let it stop here. Smash that like button to honor Rome's glory, hit subscribe so you never miss our next deep dive into history, and ring the bell so you read the first to uncover the past's biggest secrets. And tell us in the comments, do you think modern empires will fall just like Rome did? Your voice is part of this story too?